When my kids were little, my son is 4 years old and he used to always go and grab my To this day, she keeps Hi, Courtney. Hi. How are you? Hanging in there? Yeah. Oh. Well, where are we? Well, he's sitting there, so we can go closer. Oh,
No, that's not. Right at the back.
Did they? Oh, get that done. Well, there you go. So you must say don't really. Sure. How are you? Oh, I'm good. But you, they're good. Yeah. It was just kind of gives.
But, sorry, what do you call public night? All right.
Even.
All right, good evening, everyone. I guess I'm kind of halfway. You know, if we could go all here, that would be fantastic. You're all good there, but then it saves me doing the windshield wiper thing. I appreciate that. If you're watching us online, I apologize. The last few weeks, I didn't have the mic turned on properly. I was using the wrong mic. So I double checked everything. And Donna, could you say a couple of words? There we go. Yeah, the green bar came up. And, so I apologize for that.
Oh, thanks.
Wow, you know. Ethan, you're young and don't have a coffee in your hand, do you? Oh, you do. Okay. Who's? Well, yeah. If you wouldn't mind then handing those out. I guess yeah, it is possible. Appreciate it.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Thanks. We can just share one.
That is like, oh, I'll read that. Thank you very much. If you're joining us online, you'll see the background is significantly different tonight. The lighting's a little different. We are decorating for a major event coming up in the fellowship hall. So we moved Bible study here. It just feels weird to have you all in the pew.
Yes, it's kind of different.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels more formal, less informal. So, anyhow, so that's why the background is a bit different. Thank you, Ethan. I appreciate that. If you've ever driven through the Rockies, you know, when you get to the, what are those things where they avalanche sheds? What are they called? What they're called, Ethan? Oh, avalanche zones. Yeah, through Rogers Pass and those different places. And you come up to them on a sunny day, and your eyes are, you know, you're totally dilated. No, the opposite. What's the opposite of dilated? Constricted. because it's so bright. And then you hit the tunnel and it's pitch black inside. And you start to panic for a couple of minutes. We were on the bike one time, Don and I, and had dark visors down. I hit the tunnel and realized I cannot see a thing here. So right away, you're in this panic mode for about 30 or 40 feet as you kind of reconfigure everything so that you can see in the darkness. And then you go through that stretch of darkness, then you come out the other side, it's like, oh, then it's super bright again, and then your eyes are dilated. And then, it's a bit chaotic and it's a bit fearful when you go from that transition from light to dark to light again. Well, that's exactly what Romans chapter 1 and 2 are. It's light to light, and the dark is super dark, and then the light gets really bright. We are in about a third or halfway through the tunnel. So last week, we didn't choose to stream, and of those of you who are here, probably appreciated the fact that we did not stream because of the content of the book of Romans. Not that we're ashamed of Scripture in any way, but YouTube has particular guidelines about what you can say publicly, and we were discussing some explicit behaviors and images that would border on the pornographic, to be honest. And if you read Romans, you'll see that. And then if you study Roman culture in particular, you'll really see that. So for fear of broadcasting pornography, we chose to not broadcast. So that's the rationale behind it. But you could download the notes on Facebook and you could see, but you missed more of the details. And afterwards, we had some more detailed conversation. And oh my, this stuff. I do declare, those Romans were wild, crazy people. So, all right, we are through that part, but we are not out of the tunnel. Paul is arguing, and I don't mean arguing like arguing, he is like a lawyer presenting a case for the guilt of humanity. And he goes through a series of arguments or presentations like a lawyer in a courtroom. So much of this is legal language of showing that humanity stands guilty before a holy God. And so he begins by showing how the Roman culture in its perversion is guilty against the moral law of God. And he shows how God punishes us. So how does God discipline us? We saw this on Sunday. He disciplines us through his word, through our conscience, through the voice of others, and then oftentimes through our own stupidity. We suffer. You put your hand on the stove, you get burned. And that's what this argument is. So the book begins with, I'm Paul, I want to come see you because I want to give you the gospel. Then he defines these 14 or so aspects of the gospel, and then he talks about the necessity of the gospel. And he says, everyone is guilty. So, folks, what is the first grounds? Why are people who have never heard the gospel or who've never had the law guilty? On what grounds can God charge them as guilty? Why are people guilty? Because what do they have? Sin. Okay, we know there's sin, but what do they have that should give them light? What's that? Common sense should. Yes, and we know it's uncommon, and that's why it's only worth a cent. But nature, right? Yeah, nature, creation itself tells us God is powerful, God is the creator, God is beautiful, and people reject that. So that's called, Ethan? Right, what kind of revelation? General revelation. Miller would be proud of you. Thank you. Yeah, that's called general. In other words, in general, everybody has the nature of God revealed to them. And so God holds people accountable based on what they have seen. That's called general revelation. And because they reject God as creator, they reject God as authoritative, having power, and they reject that God has made a beautiful world, they choose and they fall into these behaviors. So just when you think we're done with the behaviors, we enter what's called the dark nature of the human soul, verses 28 to 32. This is, have you ever written a long letter, where it's thousands of words? Well, this is 20 illustrations of sin. Oh, how exciting. I was taught early in college that you have 3 points and a poem, right? You give them a good introduction, you give them 3 points, then you conclude with a poem or a life illustration. Nowhere was I taught to give 20 points to anyone, because people are going, but we have 20 illustrations of sin. So before we start that, taking aside last week's whole sexual nature of sin, what are the 20 sins of humanity? Not looking at Romans. Throw some out there. Greed, lying, stealing. What's that, Doug? Stealing, adultery, envy, murder, pride. Good. Anything else is sin? Anger. Well, it can be, misdirected anger. Yeah. Having false gods, idolatry. Well, you're not doing too bad. All right, let's see how you score. I wasn't going to do a test, but all right. So he starts out in verse 28. Excuse me. It's the 60-year-old puberty. Verse 28. And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, that's the whole argument ahead of it. God gave them up to a depraved mind. That's a summary of everything we looked at last week. And the word depraved means that which is rejected after examination. So someone gives you a glass of water, you examine it and you reject it. That's rejecting that which is good. Someone gives you milk, you say no, and you throw it out. That's very much in essence. The basic word is that which does not stand the test or failing to meet the test, hence worthless or unqualified. It means it's worthless. So if someone gives you milk and you taste it and it tastes sour, it doesn't pass the test. That milk is depraved. Right? That makes sense? Anything that doesn't pass the test, whether you're a mechanic or whatever it is, right? So a depraved is that which is unqualified for use. It's very often in the language of the day used to talk about metal that was rejected by the refiner because it was impure. The metals were discarded, and therefore it was basically anything that's worthless or useless. The counterfeit coin that fell below the standard weight, the cowardly soldier who failed the test in the hour of battle, the candidate for office who the citizens regard as useless, or the stone the builder rejected because of a flaw. And what they would do is interesting. On the stone that was rejected, they would inscribe with just a quick mark an A on it. And that's the word depraved in the original language. So anything with an A was not good, that was failure. Kind of different than how we work our world. So Paul is saying the mind that finds God worthless becomes itself worthless. The mind that rejects God, God rejects it. Right, exactly. So if you reject God, God will reject you. If you say that God is worthless, God says, I got news for you. You're worthless too. It's kind of almost like we're not comfortable with that. When God will say, well, you're worthless. He says, no, the way you're thinking has no worth, no value to you. It's worth less. So he's not saying the person is worthless. He's saying their thoughts have no worth, no value. Like an impure metal, like a cowardly soldier, is not really of any worth on the battlefield. So too, the mind that rejects God is of little worth. All right, and then we get the big 20. All right, Joyce, nice and loud. 29 through 32, if you wouldn't mind.
They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They disobey their parents. They are senseless, faithless, heartless, ruthless. Although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death, they not only continue to do these very things, but also approve of those who practice them.
I want you to imagine Paul writing this list. What was going through his brain? They're worthless, useless. Oh, wait, they ignore their parents. Did I miss anything? He looks out the window. No. I suspect we could sit and write our own list, right? We look around the world and we say people are, rebellious, lawless, perverted, all these things, right? All right, I am going to do my best to keep your attention. I cannot promise I can because it's 20 things or 20 sins. So as I like to say, strap in, I will do my best. All right, unrighteous, filled with all. By the way, I changed the font on your papers. I realize that not all of you are as blind as I am. So if that font is too small, let me know. But I think I shrunk you down to 12 instead of my regular 15. So, all right, unrighteousness means, break the word down. Not right. Un means, so what's another word that starts with un? Unworthy. Unfit. Unable. Right. So un's a negative, right? So unrighteous means you ain't right. Exactly. Whether it's with God or with people, whatever it is, there's a standard and you're not right. Therefore, this covers who? Everybody, right? There is none righteous. No, not. Everybody's not right with God. So it's nice. He starts with this big shotgun of humanity. All right. Then they are wicked. What does wicked mean? Evil. Unless you're from a certain era. Yo, that's wicked.
Oh, right, that's
Yeah.
wicked.
Wicked.
That's wicked.
Sorry,
This
that
is
age
true.
is showing. Yeah, it
like
means they're
sin.
evil. It's badness or an evil nature. Okay, greed. Anything? Anyone want to throw in on that? Greed is the itch for more, right? I just got this Jones, I need more, I need more, I need more, I need more, right? So greed is just the itch for what can we be greedy about? Anything and everything, right? So it's not about money necessarily. It's about whatever you have an itch for more that's unhealthy. All right. I love it. Just blanketly evil, just in general. This is deliberate wickedness which takes pleasure in doing harm. It is those who take delight in damage. Have you ever met somebody who enjoys hurting someone? Shelley, what do we call people who enjoy hurting people? Yeah, self-absorbed, who can't think of anybody else. What else do we call people who enjoy hurting people? Self-centered wrestlers. Yeah. What's that?
Sometimes bullies.
Bullies, exactly. They just take delight in that. And that's what the word evil is. Someone who enjoys hurting other people. We might call them a sadist, right? All right, envy. Familiar term. Envy differs from jealousy in that the former desires to deprive another, whereas the latter desires, well, to have the same. So jealousy, when we're envious, we want for ourselves. It is the meaner of the sins of the two. So someone who's envious, they want what the other people have. Then he throws out the word strife. And what does strife mean? What's that talk? Discord? Oh, that's a good, yeah. Anybody else? Strife. Causing problems, right? Somebody who just stirs up the pot all the time, who makes things awkward for people. This quarreling, disputing, controversy, debating and arguing. They're perverse and wearisome. Eris describes strifes about words of vain glory, people who are pride, who seek for themselves and not the truth. They're always trying to get their way, prove they're right. They don't care about the truth. They just have to be right. People create strife. Okay, then deceit. The word literally means to bait. It's the word fishhook or trap, to mislead, or someone to catch the unwary victim and pull them aside. So we see that deceit all the time. Bait and switch. We see that in advertising, right? You remember the old shampoo ads, where she's just, going, shampoo doesn't do that. Most of us have washed our hair. It never happens. But, they're deceiving you. If you buy that new Lincoln Navigator, what's that, Doug? Let me know what you get. I'll have what he's having. Yeah, so we see deceit in that. G.K. Chesterton said, all advertising is the begging of a stick in a bucket of swill. Come and get it. Deceit, but obviously not just that. Malice, only here in the New Testament, refers to a person who has an ill nature, taking everything with an evil connotation and giving a malicious interpretation. If you always think the worst in people, and you're always thinking that person's out to get me, and that's a malicious intent. They're always seeking the worst in people. Their nature is evil, and so they suspect evil in others. If we tend to have good natures, we tend to see good in others. The person who is greedy tends to see greed in others. We tend to see others reflected in our own motivations. And so he says the person who is evil will be malicious. They'll seek evil in others. Gossip, any help on that one? Pretty straightforward, right? They pour out poison on their neighbors. They like to talk. Doug, any experience with gossip at the subway? It's all pure conversations, morally upright, and no one ever speaks an ill word against them. It's beautiful. Yeah. Why I brought that up is to say that women aren't the only ones who gossip. Men are as notorious, we just call it something else. Slander, this is those who speak evil against others with the intent of injuring them. They blacken someone publicly, so in their gossip, they're saying, oh, he's so-and-so or she's so-and-so, and the intent there is to harm their neighbor. How we doing? We're almost done. Haters of God, they hate God. It's pretty straightforward. The only time this is ever used in the New Testament, this word, Someone who has turned against God. When heavenly calamity befell such a person, they would accuse God of wrong. I think we have people who do that. Insolent, that's the word arrogant, the act of wanton violence, the man who is violent in his language or his conduct. Again, another word that's only used here in the New Testament. Basically what Paul's doing is he's taking a list from the news. All right, we're doing it. Arrogant, I think we got that one down. Personal superiority. Boastful, again, only other time in 2 Timothy 3:2. I like this. Plato described this as a person who claimed greatness that he did not possess. A boaster is the man who seeks to attract admiration by claiming advantages he doesn't possess. Basically, a boast is a form of a lie. You know, you've met that person who's, well, I can do this and I can do that. You're going, your money and your mouth aren't lining up. Your ego's writing checks your body can't cash. That's a boastful person. So it's not simple. Inventors of evil, again, a unique word in the New Testament here. They create new ways to sin. They're disobedient. They don't have understanding. This is the foolish man. They're not trustworthy. They're unloving. This is the opposite of philo. This is storge. This is this awful word. Unmerciful. They're not compassionate. I'll just read this quote here. William Barclay writes, he describes Rome. He says, there never was a time when human life was so cheap. A slave could be killed or tortured. What do we want here? Oh, your battery is low. There we go. Helps to turn the power bar on. A slave could be killed or tortured by his master, for he was only a thing, and the law gave his master unlimited power over him. In a wealthy household, a slave was bringing in a tray of crystal glasses. He stumbled, and the glass fell and broke. There and then his master had him flung into the fish pond in the middle of the courtyard, where the savage lampreys devoured his living flesh. It was an age pitiless in its pleasure, for it was the great age of gladiatorial games, where people found their delight in seeing men kill each other. It was an age when the quality of mercy was gone. And on top of that, they disobeyed their parents. What picture does that paint for you? Thank you for hanging in there. I know that was long. Pretty often.
Everything you don't like.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a list of discomfort, everything you wouldn't want in someone else. I suspect if we're honest, we might find some of those in ourselves as well, right? It's a bit of a mirror. We go, yeah, I'm kind of that way. So I don't, and then he's going to use this to say that no one's without excuse. But it's a long list, so I'll go wrap it through quick. Their hearts overflowed with, take a deep breath, dishonesty, mischief, greed, malice, full of envy and murder, quarrelsome, crafty, spiteful, secret backbiters, open slanders, hateful to God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of new forms of sin, disobedient to parents, destitute of common sense, faithless to their promises, without natural affection, and without human pity. That's the dark tunnel of human experience. Anybody experience that in their lifetime? We've met people like that, and sometimes they're in the mirror in our own bathrooms. And so he says in verse 32, Danny, you want to read 32?
Although they knew God's righteous decree, those who do such things deserve death. They did not only continue to do these very things, but also prove those who practice them.
So, what's the worst accusation Paul brings? Not only do they do these things, they approve of what other people do them. We celebrate them. Take a look at that list. Are there places in our society where we celebrate these things? Sure, we celebrate pride. We celebrate envy. We celebrate greed. Man, we celebrate greed. Back in the 80s, greed is good, we would say, right? We celebrate. We celebrate those who invent new ways to do evil, right? So this idea of being pitiless. Think about someone who doesn't have pity. So he says, not only do you do it, you actually kind of make a big deal when people do it as well. So this is the accusation against humanity. Now, here's where we get to an interesting point. This entire argument is not built on Jesus yet. That's to come. It's not built on the 613 laws of Moses. This whole argument is built on what we see in the sky, the horses that walk the fields, the grass that grows under our feet. His whole argument of the guilt of humanity is built on general revelation. He says, the truth is, the world is created, God's power is eternal, his nature is majestic, and they reject that. And the fruit of rejecting that is those 20 things, right? Those who reject God's nature and power, left unto themselves, will become all these horrible things, right? And because they reject God's authority as creator, his power over them or us, and the beauty around us, that's the whole idea of majestic. Therefore, they say, if there is no divine authority or no external authority, what's left? That's what you want. Who becomes the authority if there is no authority? Yeah. If we left a baby alone without their parents, you put 9 babies down in the basement and you walk away, what are you going to get? A lot of crying. If you put 9 9-year-olds downstairs, what are you going to get? Right. If you put 35 teenagers out in the country at a party with no instruction and a few cases of adult beverage, what's going to happen? It's going to be chaos, right? We're going to get fights. We're going to get pregnancies. We're going to get all kinds of craziness, right? Because that's what happens when you take authority away. Why do we need authority?
What's wrong, first of all?
It creates order, yeah. Because if there's no authority, then I get to drive as fast as I want on the highway. I can do whatever I want, right? So in rejecting God, then where does the authority? The authority becomes on, and humans then start scramble for authority. Okay, so we move God out of the picture. There's an authority vacuum. So where do we as humans create authority? Who gets to have authority? Satan. Okay, good. Just think about human society, though. Sure. Whoever talks the loudest gets authority in the room. Yeah. Who's ever the most charismatic personality? Good. How else do we qualify or define authority in our societies? What's that? Yeah, systems of government. Yeah, exactly. Whether it's the will of the people, the divine right of kings, we the people, whatever. We'll create. Sometimes the biggest authority is the guy with the biggest sword. Emperor Charlemagne was probably 2 feet taller than everybody around him. That's why he had the most authority. He was incredibly physically powerful, and people were drawn to him. And so, as they say, you know what the golden rule is? Whoever has the gold makes the rules. So we create authority, whether it's the playground, the classroom, or the political system. Now, in our society, we say authority is built on the consent of the people. But we also know that in a lot of societies, that's not the case. Right? So if the minute we remove divine authority, we have to create an authoritative structure. And sometimes that authority is simply based on power. Who's ever the strongest makes the rules. Why did Rome rule the world? They were powerful. They were the most powerful, right? If you didn't like what Rome said, you know what they would do? They would kill you. That's right. The legions. By what authority do you make the words of Caesar? By what authority do you make your claims? By the 9th Legion of Rome. Click. End of conversation, right? So that's it. And so, anyhow, we won't talk about our friends in Montana. Absolutely reject authority. All right. So we then create authority structures, or we say that we alone are. Then if there's no divine power, well, then where does the power come from? We have to create basis for some kind of power. We have to have a reason for the world to exist, a reason for power to exist. So then we become the powerful ones, we make the rules, and we decide what's normal. Right? These are now the norms. Think about 40 years ago. Almost everybody, sorry, back row might not, but what were the social norms 30 years ago? Think of what was normal. Do you hear a lot of swearing growing up? Probably not, right? It was pretty rare. Everybody smoked. Yeah, that's a good example of reversing the norm, right? So all of a sudden that norm has changed. I'll go back to swearing. Now, back then, I didn't know how to swear until I was like 10. I'd never heard a single word in my life until somebody, and now swearing is incredibly common. It's become a social norm, right? So without divine authority, divine power, the norms change. That's interesting, Joyce, because you're right. Sometimes the norms do change for the better. Yeah. Smoking is a good example. Yeah, no, there are times for sure. I don't want to be all negative. The tunnel has the occasional light in it. And There is no divine beauty or majesty, no measure for beauty. Therefore, who decides what's beautiful? We do. The artist does. The crowd does, right? Think about music. Let's think of like a industrial ambient noise out of Denmark. Just going, oh, that's beautiful. Or country rap. All right. Now you get personal. So there is no standards of beauty anymore, and therefore anything can be beautiful. All right, you get the point? Where we end up is this. I want to just illustrate this with a poem. When William Henley was 16 years old, his left leg required amputation owing to the complications from tuberculosis. So in the early 1870s, after seeking treatment for a problem with his other leg at a hospital called Margate, he was told that he would require a simple procedure. He instead chose to travel to Edinburgh in Germany, or Austria, I'm not sure which, in August. What's that? Oh, Edinburgh. Thanks, Donnie. Yeah, Scotland, not Germany. In August of 1873, to enlist the services of distinguished English surgeon Joseph Lister, who was able to save Henley's remaining leg after multiple surgical interventions on his foot. While recovering from the infirmary, he wrote the verse for Invictus. Invictus is probably one of the clearest poems to describe the human condition without God. If we reject divine authority, if we reject divine power, and if we reject divine beauty, this is where we end. Now, people love Invictus. This has been used in Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams. This poem has been used. But listen to the rebellion in Invictus. Here we go. Dylan, nice and loud. Do you want to read Invictus?
4 paragraphs there.
Yeah, the very short ones.
Out of the night that covers me, black as cold, I thank whatever gods may be for. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I cannot still cry aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody about. Beyond this place of wrath, with tears, but a horror shade, and yet the menace of the years finds, shall find great. It matters not how straight the gate. I am the master of my fate.
All right. Do you feel it? This is going to feel like you're in English class. Examine the poem. All right. He starts with saying it's dark. He's had surgery, right? Black as the pit from pole to pole. He says, I thank what? Whatever gods may be. My unconquerable soul. He says, in the fell clutch of circumstance, he says, I lost a foot. I haven't winced or cried aloud. The bludgeonings of what? Chance. There's no God. My head is bloody but unbowed. And then he talks about death. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms nothing. He says, there's no heaven, there's no hell. There's just the horror of the shade, darkness. And yet the menace of those years, even though I'm getting old and I'm about to die, I'm not afraid. So it doesn't matter whether the gate is straight or if God, whomever he may be or whatever it may be, charges the punishment. I'm the master. Invictus really is the spirit of the age. Now it's funny, it was written in the 1870s, but he was right on the mark. You have probably met people, this would be their watchword. I don't care. I'm the captain. I'm the master of my fate. I don't care how dark it is. I don't care about death. I thank God. I don't thank God. I am the master of my fate. So this poem fits well with those 20 verses. So what does Isaiah say? Henry, next page, those verses 50, 20, and 21.
Just read on there.
Yeah, you got it.
Woe to those who call who
Substitute.
substitute darkness for light for darkness, substitute vain. Woe to those who know law.
If you put those two lines beside each other, Invictus on one side and Isaiah on the other, you see an indictment. Not a criticism, but a clear contradiction, Isaiah says, look, you're in serious trouble if you think evil is good and good is evil. Paul just said they take delight in it and they praise those who do the same thing. If you swap out darkness for light and light for darkness, bitter for sweet, it's poetic, right? Bitter for sweet, sweet for bitter. Woe to if you are wise in your own eyes and clever in your own sight. Yeah, there's a line there because we should be, wise. But if you're wise and you're not, if I'm so wise and profound, I understand all things. Now I want that spirit in my mechanic. I want him to be wise and clever, but maybe not my philosopher or theologian. All right. That is the big chunk. We're going to move on. We've got a few minutes yet. That is the opening indictment of Paul's letter. He's basically saying, what about people? What's that, Dan? They're brutal. Yeah, on so many levels. All right, chapter 2 picks it up. I'm just going to show you the breakdown of 2, 3, and 4, and then we'll probably take a few weeks to this. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 8, is the final judgment of the Gentiles. He's just described the Gentiles, their sexual perversions and their moral perversions, and he's showing how God judges them. Then in 9 through 16, he makes a transition. Because the Gentiles are under what law? Heathen? General revelation, right? But the Jews, they had what? They had the Torah, the law. So you would think they would do better. Okay? If someone has, all they have is creation, you go, that's okay. I can see where you could mess that up. But if I gave you 613 laws about how to get right with God, you'd think you'd do better. Right? It's like learning to drive a vehicle by yourself versus being instructed. You'd think you'd get better if someone told you the rules. So then he makes this transition versus, and then he moves into the guilt of the Jews. Paul wants to show people you need the gospel. The Gentiles need the gospel because they have sinned under their revelation. The Jews need the gospel because they have sinned despite their revelation. And then 3 and 4 is a summary of how everyone's guilty. And then 21 to 26, he begins to talk about justification by faith, getting right with God. And then 27 through 4:25 is all about justification by faith as revealed in the Old Testament. Basically, the rest of the book from this point on is we're all broken. Here's how God fixes. That's the book of Romans. Here's how we're broken. Now, we're broken in 20 different ways, right? But we're fixed in how many ways? What? Fire, exactly. Jesus. All right, let's pick it up. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. Grab your Bibles. Just take a moment to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. And welcome to the continuing profound and deep, dark view of human nature. I won't get you to read out loud, but just take a moment to read it. Just stick your hand up when you're done. That's okay, so I can lend you mine. We'll get into it. All right, we're on the second half of the curve into the dark tunnel. The New Testament is funny. Oh, not haha, but what does the Bible say about the nature of human beings in the best sense, in the good side? We're all created how? In God's image. That's a pretty profound statement. So you're downtown in Saskatoon, you see somebody looking pretty rough, you go, somewhere in there is the divine image of God, the divine spark. That there's it could be just our left eye is all that's left, but there's something in that person at some point has been created in the image of God. That's affirming for all of us, right? Okay, what else is positive? We're all fearfully and wonderfully made. Exactly. All fearfully, it's kind of crazy, but we're also wonderfully made. I've never met anybody who's not wonderfully made. Good. What else is positive? We're all broken together. We all share a common broken nature. You know, I've never met anybody who's not broken, and I'm not either. We got that in common. You know, that, anything else wonderful about us? Well, a sense of humor. You know, we're all made to love and to be loved. The Bible speaks very well of us, right? It says we're a little lower than the angels. It's pretty profound. On the other hand, Scripture also says some awful things about people. This whole idea that we're a little lower than the angels. There's a wonderful book out by Michael Schreier called Killer Angels, which is a story of the Civil War. And in the story, there's a former college professor who taught English, and he becomes a colonel in the Northern Army. And he meets this old, rusty, savage Irish sergeant. And the colonel's very like, what a piece of work is man, how noble and reasonable. He's quoting Shakespeare and all this stuff. And the sergeant tunes him in. And here's a couple of quotes from the sergeant, the ones that I could print. So the colonel has just quoted Shakespeare. What a piece of work is man, how noble, how like the angels. What a piece of work is man, in action like an angel. And the old man, grinning, had scratched his head and then said stiffly, well, boy, if he's an angel, he's sure a murdering angel. And that's why the book's called Killer Angels. Then later on in the book, he says, because he's talking to this colonel, calls him Colonel Darling. He says, when you've got my experience of the world, you will have learned that good men are rare, much rarer than you think. So he sees the world from his perspective, and he sees, you know what? There aren't very many good people out there. As a matter of fact, if man is an angel, he's actually an angel that kills himself. So you got to remember, this is written at the height of the Civil War, where people were slaughtering each other in unimaginable numbers. But his perspective on what we call the depravity or the darkness of man is brought forward through this novel. And anyhow, Colonel Darling, Squirrel, wonderful book based on a true story. Colonel Darling went on to be the governor of Massachusetts. Squirrel. All right, let's take a look at some verses, and I'm going to read them to you. And as I read them, what I want you to do is I want you to get your crayons out of your mental crayon box. You can use any color you want. And I want you to paint a picture of humanity, of people. But these are the crayons. So I'm going to give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You get 7 crayons. And then in your mind, I want you to draw a picture. Then I want you to describe the picture. I won't give you 7 crayons. All right. Crayon number 1. For he delivered us from the domain of darkness. All people live in the dominion or under the domain of darkness. Crayon number 2. You were dead in your trespasses, in which you formerly walked, according to the course of the world, according to the prince of the power of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience. So, not only are you in the domain of darkness, you're dead in that darkness. You're dead in the dark. Crayon number 3. We know that we are of God, but the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. Crayon number 4. We are treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Next crayon. But each one is tempted when they are carried away and enticed by their own lusts. And that lust conceives, it gives birth to sin, and sin accomplishes, it brings forth death. This image of a stillborn child, very graphic here. But this is my favorite. This is a zombie verse, by the way. If you want verses about zombies in the Bible, this is the zombie verse. But she who gives herself to wanton pleasure is dead while she lives. So it's the Walking Dead. And the last verse is this. For from within the hearts of men proceed, and women, by the way, proceed evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. And all these evil things proceed within and defile us. Okay, there's your crayons. Anybody? What's your picture of humanity like? Black, dark? Blackest darkness. Any optimism? Any sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns? No. Scripture, on the one hand, paints this portrait of humanity a little lower than the angels. That we are made in the image of God, that there is joy and the capacity to love and to be loved, all contained within us. But on the other hand, what do we like? Yeah. The London Times once asked the question, what is the problem with humanity? And you were supposed to send a letter to the editor and explain it. And the mighty G.K. Chesterton said, what is the problem with humanity? He wrote back 2 words and got published. He said, I am. We all have this within us, right? We look at these and go, yes, this is the life away from the Creator. the life of lawlessness. So it paints a rather bleak picture. And so Romans chapter 2, as we move into it, gives us these 7 guiding principles concerning God's judgment, that he judges according to the truth, that we possess accumulated guilt, he will judge us according to our works, he doesn't respect persons, he doesn't judge judges and the criminal by any different. He judges us according to our lifestyle, we'll get into that. He judges us according to the secrets of our hearts, and that there is no special national groups. He judges each nation. So that God judges fairly. All right. As we move into this chapter now, Romans presents 3 defenses against God's judgment the pagans had. The pagans were saying, God has no right to judge me. I am an innocent person. How dare God judge me for who I am? And so it's as if the pagans are in a courtroom and saying, how dare you? You're wrong. Paul says, no, like a lawyer that he is. He comes back and says, no, you need to understand that God is just, as this whole list I just shared with you. And so here were the 3 defenses against guilt. So the crown says, you're guilty. And the defense says, no, I'm not guilty. Here's the 3 grounds for my innocence, right? A good courtroom scene. This is like, who's the guy that your dad always reminded me of? Matlock. Thank you. There it is. Yeah. So this is like Matlock. So the pagans would say, I am informationally innocent. That is, I didn't know. So, you know when you leave a town and that sign says slow to 70? You go, when does that start? When did that end? Like when you leave town to go north here, when does it turn into 100? You can say, well, I don't really know, Your Honor, officer. You know, so they're saying, look, I don't know. And what is this first argument? It says, you do know. And what are the grounds that you know? What's that? The sign, right? General revelation. Nature convicts us that God is in charge, that life is beautiful, and that he is the creator. So you can't argue that you're innocent because you don't know. Everybody's guilty because they know something. They don't act on it. So that's the informationally innocent argument. I didn't know. And Paul says, no. You saw the sparrows and the wind. You looked up at night and saw the stars. You know God exists. There's something greater than you. For you to say, I am the greatest, that's Muhammad Ali, right? No, there's always something. All right, that's the first argument. Second one is, I am morally innocent. What I did was not that bad compared to, I didn't do all that sexual stuff in the first chapter. I lied, or I cheated, or I, disobeyed my parents. I'm not all that bad, right? That's the coming argument. But that's the argument from action. Look, I didn't behave bad. And what does Paul say? Oh, yes, you did. Look at this immorality. And the third argument is, I'm socially innocent. That is, at least I'm not as bad as the other person. I'm not like him. I'm not like her. And that's the argument by comparison. By judging others, we say I'm innocent. He says, actually, by judging others, guilty. So there are these 3 arguments that people would say, God has no right to judge me. I'm informationally innocent. I didn't know. I'm morally innocent. What I did was not that bad. I'm socially innocent. At least I'm not as bad as the other person. Should those 3 get you off the hook? In a bad court, they might. But Paul says, no. None of those arguments stand up in God's court. You're all guilty. What do we got? All right, 2 more minutes yet. So we've looked at the first 2 arguments already, the argument from innocent and the argument from their behavior. And now he moves into the social argument. I'm not as bad as the next person. So he addresses the hypocrisy of those who think, compared to my neighbor, I'm not all that bad. So I say it. So verse 1 says, therefore, you have no excuse, you foolish person. He's tough on them. Every one of you who passes judgment, for in that matter in which you judge something else, what do? You condemn yourself because you do the same thing. Well, I'm not like him, I don't lie. We've all lied. I'm not like him, I didn't, steal money from the company, whatever. No, you probably stole it something. I'm not like my neighbor, I didn't betray my partner. Well, Jesus said, so they're saying, look, I'm not guilty. And he says, no, you're judging someone, you're doing the very same thing. I like this quote. A hypocrite is someone who complains there's too much sex and violence in their DVD collection. So he says, therefore you're without excuse. First, he says, those who shame the openly bad of humanity consider themselves better because of their race, their civilization, their environment, their education, their culture. So the Pharisee stands on the street corner and says, I'm so glad I'm not like him. I tithe, I do this. And then the poor man, what does he do? Have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus says, who is justified? The man who pleaded for mercy, right? So those who say, I'm not bad, I'm innocent because of whatever, he says, no, no. And then he addresses those who shame, thinking themselves better because of their religion. In other words, I'm better because of my race or my culture or my civilization. Does it cut in God's book? And they say, well, no, I'm better because of my religion. Still doesn't cut in God's book. We're all guilty. Turn to Sylvia. Do you have your Bible? You don't have your glasses with you. Donna, James 2:10, and Shelley, Matthew 7:1-5. Feels more like a lecture when I'm in here than in here. Donna, James 2:10.
For whoever keeps the whole law and yet stumbles in one point, he has become guilty of all.
Right. So who's guilty? If you break one law, you're guilty, right? There's 613 laws. Pick the one you want. You break one, you're guilty of all 612. It's pretty harsh, isn't it? But that's the reality. If you think you're justified by keeping the law, I got bad news for you. Shelley, Matthew 7:1-5.
That judge, or you too will be judged. In the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your hand? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time you have the plank in your hand? First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck.
It's interesting. That passage, Jesus says, don't judge, and then he says, do judge. But here's the criteria for judging. Don't judge someone when you yourself are guilty. But if that's an area that you have, the plank isn't there anymore, then yeah, you can see. There's that video series, I forget what it was, they call it The Laughing Jesus. But I love when he's telling this story because they've got Jesus kind of walking around talking to people, and he grabs a guy's walking stick. And he holds it up to his eye and goes, yeah, and he does this whole little pirate thing with the walking stick. How do you see if you've got a plank in your eye? It's funny. Sorry. You didn't have to be there because none of us were. But you can imagine it. And this is what Jesus is saying, and what Paul's just reinforcing, that if you say someone's guilty, but you're doing it yourself, don't judge them guilty. Because right? He says, look, stop being blind to your own faults. They conveniently forgot that they had done wrong. They're saying, I'm an innocent person. And Paul says, no, you've done the very same thing. Don't you see? Well, no, my faults are not. And what they do is he says, you're renaming your sin. They're like this little thing. You lose your temper. I have righteous anger. You're a jerk. I'm having a bad day. You have a critical spirit. I bluntly tell the truth. You gossip. I share prayer requests. You curse and swear, I let off steam. You're pushy, I'm intensely goal-oriented. You're greedy, I'm simply taking care of business. You're a hypochondriac, not really sick. You stink, I merely have an earthy aroma. Yeah. And that's exactly what this opening passage in Romans chapter 2 is talking about. You say this, but you are this. They're saying, you're a stinking sinner, but I just have an earthy aroma of my personal choices, right? And Paul says, how dare you judge someone when you stink as well? So the answer isn't to say, I don't stink. What's the answer? We all stink. Exactly. The answer is to be honest. So the answer, what Paul's calling people to do is say, look, I lose my temper. I'm a jerk. I've got a critical spirit. I gossip. I curse and swear. I'm pushy. I'm greedy. I'm a hypochondriac. And I stink. And then what does God do? He says, yes. That's honest. That's called confession. And then what does he do? He forgives us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins and to cleanse us from all stinkiness. If we can paraphrase the chapter. Paul's not condemning sin in this moment. He's condemning those who say, they don't sin. It says, for once in your life, be honest. All right, verse 2. We know that the judgment of God rightly falls on those who practice things. He says, you're just as guilty. And because you're guilty, you can't say you're not guilty. All right, let's keep moving here. Okay. And then he begins to roll out, and we're going to stop with this on page 9, how God judges us, and in turn, how we're to. Now, I'm not going to read all the verses, they're all here in chapter 2, but I'm going to walk through them with you. This is the basis or the foundation which we can judge. Jesus says, take the speck out of your eye so that you can see. So if I confess that I'm a jerk, right, and I go, man, this is how I'm a jerk. You know who's really good at spotting jerks? Someone who is one. Right? Someone who's a liar can tell if someone's lying. Someone who is, pick another one of those just for the sake of. Someone who has a critical spirit can detect it in others. Someone who's a gossip, you can hear it, right? So it says, once you acknowledge that, then you realize that God's judgment is here. So how does God judge? He judges according to the truth. His judgment is inescapable. You can't avoid it. And we'll see this as we move into the rest of the chapter, though. Sometimes God delays judgment in his patience and mercy. His judgment is measured out according to the accumulation of our guilt. Judgment is never grosser than the punishment. I think we had an experience recently where a kid did something and got over-punished. So he says God never over-punishes or under-punishes. Always fair. It's always perfectly fair. The scales are always a perfect balance. He judges us according to our works, what we do. He judges us according to privilege or the light received. Those who have more light are judged harsher. Not many of you should be teachers, or you'll be judged harsher. It is without respect to person. He judges you whether you're rich or poor, Mennonite or English. He judges in accordance to our performance, what we do, not just what we know. And he judges according to what we know inside the secrets of our hearts, and in accordance with reality, not our religious position. All right. Next week, we'll pick up verses 3 to 11 of why God is right in judging us. Now, we're into the darkness of the tunnel. And if this is the only part you've ever heard this, that's too bad, because there's so much more to come. Paul wants to take us, and he wants to show that every person on earth is guilty before God. Here's why. And he just keeps pounding the courtroom like the prosecuting attorney, reading judgment after judgment, charge after charge after charge after charge, so that ultimately there is none righteous, no. He wants us to show that in the courtroom, all your defenses of wealth, power, privilege, race, being a Jew or being a Gentile, being a morally good people will not stand up in God's court. Why? Why does he want to take us to this darkness? Exactly. Because once I realize my need, then what will I do? Then I'll repent and I'll be rescued. But if I can't swim, but if I said, I can swim, and I jumped off the deep end of the pool and said, don't worry, I'm doing fine, and as I slowly die, right? What would be the fruit of my arrogance? Death. That's right. I would die a horrible death in the pool. Right. But if I say, I can't swim, and I go, oh, you need some help here, buddy. Right? So if I do fall in the pool, I yell, I can't swim. Right? To the people, you can rescue me. The problem is people think they can swim in God's heavenly pool. Well, that's a weird metaphor. But we think we can swim in this divine pool of God's goodness. We have to realize that we can't. So once we realize we can't swim, then we get a savior. So this chapter and this beginning of this book is so dark. It is morally dark, sexually dark. In every way, it is judgmental, it is condemning, it is harsh, and it is cruel for a reason. So that we can find light and salvation. The person who doesn't think they need saving when they do is in serious trouble. But the person who knows they need a savior is in serious hope. It's a wonderful place. When I finally admitted I needed help with my mental health, it took a long time. And it was very dark and it was hard. But once I did, man, I have a T-shirt that says this, this good mood is brought to you by medication, kind of thing. Once we find we're desperate, I'm beating a dead horse. That's a terrible metaphor.
In talking with that cool metaphor conversation would say, you know, oh, you don't have to know how to swim. You'll just keep getting pulled out of the deep end.
Sure.
It doesn't matter if you can swim or not.
You'll never drown.
You'll never.
The water's not going to
You
affect
can
you.
do whatever you want. You'll never.
So what's the fruit of that thinking?
No accountability. There's nothing matters.
Yeah.
There's no purpose. There's no meaning.
And you will
There's no
die.
responsibility. There's nothing.
Yeah. It's a very, I think we have to go to darkness before we can often get into light, right? We have to admit that I need help. AA, right? You know, you got to admit you need help before you can find help.
The sooner that you can notice the lights are dimming, the better.
That's right, yeah. Especially when you have a torn retina. Or cancer. Or anything, right? The sooner we admit we need help, the more effective the treatment can be for us. All right, so that's why these chapters are very, very dark. And thank you for hanging out in the darkness. The light is coming. And I've got wonderful good news. It's called the gospel, which shall be for all people. All right, thanks.